In this demo, I'm going to run through the following capabilities from Xanadu Plus. First, I'll submit a dispute from the portal as a cardholder and show how this tracking page has been updated. Then I'll move to the agent side to pick up the transaction, review intake, and show how the generic questionnaire and multi-network support come into play when disputing multiple transactions on different networks. So first I'll go to the portal as cardholder Brian Lara, as he's reporting a dispute for a transaction he doesn't recognize on his card. He chooses Report a Dispute and picks his credit card. He then picks this transaction for Bookshop. Brian doesn't recognize this transaction, but he's moving quickly and is going to end up miscategorizing it by answering the questions incorrectly. From here, the dispute questionnaire populates for consumer disputes. And this was processed on a MasterCard credit card, so these are MasterCard related questions he's answering. So he moves through these quickly and again answers some of these questions incorrectly. Brian has no documents to upload, and here's an example of a revision we made in this release. In the portal, we updated this disclaimer message here. But note, this is configurable by the customer. Brian goes ahead and submits. And here we see the category of consumer disputes and our new field, dispute status, which will track the dispute for the customer throughout the dispute resolution process. While we have these stages out of the box, the customer can configure these stages to be anything they want and anything they are okay with the customer seeing. Next, we'll move to the agent side. I'm logged in already as Sam Gray. I pick up the case submitted by Brian and begin to review intake. As you can see, the initiate stage of the playbook is skipped because Brian has already submitted the dispute on the portal. After discussing further with the customer, Sam Gray realizes that Brian has miscategorized the dispute as consumer when it was actually fraud. So the agent can go in here during review and modify the reason for dispute. Next, with further conversation with Brian and more review of his transactions, he recognizes another fraudulent transaction he wants to dispute. So Sam Gray goes into View All Transactions and adds this Amazon Fitness kit to the case. Here, you can see on the portal side, the tracker page has already updated to dispute reason to fraud. And here's where we see the multi-network support come into play. Here we're seeing multiple transactions on a single case. For background, for debit and credit cards, banks are required to have secondary networks for merchants to process their transactions on. So even if you buy something on a MasterCard credit card, the merchant could choose to process this transaction through a different network instead of MasterCard. For the purposes of this demo, as we've shipped eligibility rules for MasterCard and Visa, the Bookshop transaction was processed by MasterCard, the primary network, and Amazon Fitness was processed by Visa as the secondary network that the merchant chose. We can identify this on our side by the network ID field. Based on what network this field shows, we must run the applicable chargeback eligibility rules for each. So in this case, we'll have to run one through Visa and one through MasterCard rules. Because the category changed from consumer disputes to fraud, we will need to answer different questions. And here's where we'll see the generic questionnaire come into play. Because we are processing on two networks, we will see a mix of MasterCard and Visa questions asked on one screen and overlapping questions as well. Next, he hits Submit. Before submitting the transaction for investigation, the agent looks under Card Dispute Transactions. We can see here more closely the two separate intakes that are shown for each card network. And the Bookshop transaction was MasterCard, so we're seeing MasterCard questions here. The Amazon Fitness transaction is a Visa dispute, so we're seeing Visa-specific questions here. Back to the playbook, we can submit. As you can see under this widget here on the left, the Bookshop transaction receives immediate provisional credit. We can move forward on our playbook, easily refund any interest or fees here. The Amazon transaction, on the other hand, does not get any credit, and we can see in the eligibility rules here why that is. There are a number of Visa reason codes that fail the eligibility criteria. So that shows the multi-network support in action. So lastly, what we'll do is quickly flash back to the portal and see what the customer would see. We can see that the dispute has advanced to the investigate stage and will continue to move through as the dispute is worked on. This can all be configured based on what the customer wants to show. That concludes our demo showing the new advancements we made on intake, the generic questionnaire, as well as multi-network support.